special edition of Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know. On Tuesday night, we will know who will be the new mayor of the city. Today, some of my colleagues at the New York Editorial Board will help me make some predictions, hopefully, and offer some last minute analysis of this competitive election that is already drawing high numbers of early voters. Will the results confirm the polling signaling a victory for Zoran Mamdani? Will Andrew Cuomo manage to stage a political comeback? Here with me is Christina Greer, co host of the FAQ NYC podcast and associate professor at Fordham University, and Josh Greenman, managing editor of Vital City. Welcome to the podcast. I want to say before I get you to give you your predictions that if any of you listening and watching today, if you want to know more about the New York Editorial Board, we are a group of journalists and academics having regular breakfast interviews with New York City officials and newsmakers. You can always check our Substack at nyeditorialboard.substack.com. Welcome to the podcast, Christina and Josh.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
let me start with you, Christina. Uh, what do you think is going to happen on Tuesday night? Are we going to have a last minute surprise, or do you think the polls are going to be confirmed by the vote?
Right. So, as political scientists, we never make predictions, but I'm going to make I'm going to say one of two things will happen. One, either the race will be much closer than we suspect. I do think Mamdani gets across the finish line, but I think that Sliwa will overperform and Cuomo will overperform as well. That's one scenario, and Mamdani still gets across the finish line. The other scenario is that Mamdani has a total blowout, and he's able to mobilize this undercounting of Muslim New Yorkers, young New Yorkers, brand new voters to the political process, South Asian voters who are notoriously undercounted, and sort of showing that we have to sort of think about ways that we contact voters to have better predictions and better polling. So those are my two scenarios that I think could happen.
So, Christina, before we hear from Josh, I want to say that our colleague Nicole Gelinas is also with us right now, and she is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Hi, Nicole. How are you? And welcome to the podcast.
Good evening. I'm well. Apologies for being a moment late.
No worries. What do you think, Nicole, is going to happen on Tuesday night? What's your prediction?
I will take Chrissy's example and not make a prediction. I think I learned my lesson from the primary on predicting things, that anything could happen here. And I think we've had a chaotic weekend with the get out the vote efforts and some of the last minute advertising campaigns, mostly a negative advertising campaign coming from groups that are sympathetic to former Governor Cuomo. And I do think that will be effective. I think it will be closer than people think, but I wouldn't want to venture a guess as to the outcome. I think it's safe to say that Curtis Sliwa won't win, but other than that, who knows?
Josh, what's your take?
I mean, I approach all these things with humility since 2016, frankly, when everyone was so totally wrong. I have no idea how the pollsters figure out their turnout model. They didn't get the turnout model right. It's one exception probably in the primary. And there's a different turnout model in the general, and I don't know how they guess. So I have no clue. That's the unsatisfying answer, but that's the truth.
So this is what I would say, because I will be with you. I would say that maybe I don't want to make a prediction that I don't know, because I'm not on the streets. But I can tell you that my students here at Columbia Journalism School, they went out there to talk to voters during the first weekend of early voting, and no matter where they went, they found a lot of Mamdani voters. They found Mamdani voters on the Upper West Side. They found Mamdani voters in Jackson Heights and Corona in Queens, Hispanic voters for the Democratic nominee. They also went to the Bronx and that was a little bit more mixed in some Black communities in the Bronx for Mamdani, but also for Andrew Cuomo. But every single analysis that came out of all those stories, 11 students out there talking to voters during the first weekend of early voting, it indicates that Mamdani is extremely popular and popular with the people going to vote. We're not just talking about polling random New Yorkers. And my question to you, Christina, is like, how is it that Mamdani, someone who we didn't know about like 6 months ago, how is it that he's so popular right now, not only in New York City, but he's making waves all over the country within the Democratic Party, now with some division and some infighting. And we also know that all over the world, people are paying attention to this race. Would you have imagined that earlier this year?
No, I mean, we do know that mayor of New York City is like the second hardest job in the country behind the president. That's one. We do know that Eric Adams famously said, you know, people don't care about social media, they care about Social Security. But I do think that social media has changed exponentially from the 2021 campaign to now. And don't forget, in the primary, Mamdani was the youngest candidate, and he knows how to effectively use social media to get people not just on TikTok and Instagram, but then transfer that out to the streets, right? And get those people as volunteers, you know, as evidenced by the fact that you can't buy merch. You have to volunteer to get your cool t-shirt or your bag or your hat to show that you're part of it. And so in social networks, that actually does work. I mean, we've seen someone run an incredibly disciplined campaign, similar to Eric Adams in 2021. When everyone else is focusing on the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side and the 5 neighborhoods in Brooklyn, he's everywhere. He's at the gay clubs. He's, you know, at sort of where young people are. He's walking the top of Manhattan all the way down. He doesn't seem to be scared of New York. You know, Cuomo famously is in his car. He doesn't really want to talk to people. And so Mamdani is like, listen, even if you don't agree with me, Staten Island, I'm still going to come to you because I want to be a mayor for everyone. I do think that it's quite fascinating. This is like an international race because a lot of people across the globe do see him as their candidate, right? He's born and raised, you know, his early years in East Africa. So, of course, East Africans claim him. His middle name is Kwame, after Kwame Nkrumah. So West Africans can claim him. You've got South Asians. You have an incredibly diverse Muslim community in New York. Over 1 million New Yorkers are Muslim, but sort of underpolled and in the shadows, especially post 9/11. You know, he is the thing that Republicans always said Obama was, right? He's a socialist. He was born in Africa. He's a Muslim. Okay, Obama was none of those things. Mamdani is all of those things, and proudly so. And I also think that part of what makes this conversation for Mamdani not just about New York State, the country, and internationally, is that Mamdani has stood strong on his beliefs about Palestine. And it seems as though public opinion has moved closer to Mamdani over the last, say, 6 to 10 months. And had he, I think, pivoted, had he acquiesced and said, you know, okay, when everyone else on stage says they're going to Israel for like, what are you doing when you first get elected? Had he pivoted, I think a lot of people would have seen him as, oh, just another politician who, when everyone else says something, he goes along to get along. And he didn't. He said, I'll be the mayor of New York. I'm going to stay in New York. And then when pressed and pressed and pressed again, he stood firm. And I think a lot of young people respect that. I think a lot of lefties respect that. And I think a lot of people who don't really think that international politics relates to them, but there's a certain level of respect that they have for this young person who seems to have a character that's deep down and embedded and rooted, and not just kind of a flimsy politician that we've seen people flip-flop back and forth when it's politically convenient.
Nicole, do you agree?
I think we're starting to see hints that he's more politically flexible than he
Agreed.
makes himself out to be. He was a defund the police person 5 years ago. He has completely moved away from that. And he says, you know, he's moved away from it because he's running for mayor. He's doing something differently. He's doing something different than he was doing 5 years ago. But that is a complete flip-flop turnaround. You know, there's no way for him to try to showcase it as anything else, and he really doesn't try to. I mean, he outright says, I was defund back then, I'm not defund now. And I think he implies in that he knows New York City voters might not hold his pro-Palestine views against him, but he would have a hard time getting elected in New York on a defund the police program, even among more liberal Democratic voters. So it kind of points up the truth of this, that the international politics does not matter as much as bread and butter local issues, including public safety. But he is, I think we'll see, he has put himself in a corner in that some of his explicit, quite simple promises to the voters are not things that he can enact on his own. So I think should he win, we will see more of this political flexibility as he has to explain to people why he cannot enact exactly what he promised.
Josh?
I mean, both Christina and Nicole said a lot, and I agree with essentially everything that both of them said. I think all I would add is he's talented. He has magnetism. He has charisma. These things are big deals, that override his youth and inexperience, and even to some degree his ideology, because in the first 5-10 seconds that you listen to him, for most people tuning into those debates, he didn't hurt himself. I will say in the second debate, he came off to me as more of a package politician. He came off to me as leaning a little bit more into his kind of catchphrases and too much into negative campaigning. And that didn't bode particularly well for him. But in general, he's got something. There is candidate quality that really matters in American politics, most of which is, both retail and via social media and stuff. And I will say one other thing about social media. Christina got at this a little bit, but in the primary and also in the general, he does communicate a powerful innate optimism in New York City that Cuomo has not been running on. Cuomo has been running on the city is in serious, serious trouble. And I think one of the things that this election will be a referendum on is, are New Yorkers down on the state of their city? Or do they fundamentally think, you know what, it's basically okay. It's basically fine. We're not going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah, overall crime numbers are up, and felony assaults and misdemeanor assaults are up. But how big of a problem is that really? Mamdani is implicitly saying affordability is a big problem, but the city's fundamentals are not that bad. And Cuomo is saying that the city's fundamentals are seriously problematic. And I think we'll see what the voters believe.
And is this a new way of doing politics, or an old way of doing politics that he is bringing back? Because one thing that surprises me a lot when I talk to New Yorkers is that many of them, they admit, Nicole, that they don't believe he's going to be able to do all those things that he's promising. Even they say, I don't really agree with some of his policies, but I'm going to vote for him, which for us covering politics for so long, that is a really interesting phenomenon. So what is it about him, beyond being talented, beyond being very charming? He's just like a two-term assembly member from Queens. Christina, how is he shaping a message that is apparently resonating with communities like the African American community, or the younger African American community, the Hispanic community, some white Democrats, even some significant number of Jewish voters in the city? What is it about him?
Well, I mean, this campaign, Josh said, I think it's a brilliantly run campaign. So whether he gets across the finish line or not, I mean, I think he has changed the way we see campaigning. There is a level of 2008 hope that's there. I think sadly, Eric Adams had a lot of opportunities that he squandered, but the city is surviving. I mean, I think Eric Adams had an opportunity to really make it thrive, which he didn't. And there is still this optimism that a lot of people, we choose to live here. We choose to live in one of the most expensive places on the planet for a reason. There's just a lot of us like the fact that it's a diverse city. A lot of us like the fact that languages are spoken. A lot of us like the fact that you can get different types of food at 3 a.m. And there's a certain level of optimism that he's presenting, which is like, we can actually do this together. That's the whole thing. Like, I need you all to help me do this together. A lot of those promises, as Nicole said, it's like, can we do this? It's like, well, this is where we're going to have an interesting opportunity because Kathy Hochul has to go through a primary before an incredibly tough general election. And as evidenced by, the rally that they had last week, she's going to need him quite a bit. She's going to need all of this enthusiasm. She's going to need a lot of his supporters to actually turn out for her, not just in June, but also in November. So he is in a unique position where he might be able to, he's only been in Albany for a short period of time, but at least he knows a little bit about Albany. He's in a unique position to sort of work with Kathy Hochul because he's got a 6-month deadline to show folks something before the DSA totally turns on him. And, as Nicole, I agree. We've seen, he's pivoting. But for me, LBJ is my favorite president, right? And so I respect the fact that like people have to move with the new role. So like LBJ, staunch racist and bigot when he's in the Congress, but by the time he's the president, he's signing in civil rights, voting rights, and immigration acts because there's an evolution. I think the difference is we're used to seeing politicians where it's like, well, I said some things back then, and that was 15, 20 years ago, Bill de Blasio, I was a Sandinista or whatever it was. It's like, yeah, well, you were a kid then. We're looking at someone, it's like, well, I said those things back then. It's like, well, back then was 3 years ago. Like, have you really changed? But he's saying, well, when I'm an assembly member from Queens, that's very different than representing close to 9 million incredibly diverse New Yorkers. And I am going to have to pivot. And if pocketbook issues and public safety and affordability are of great import to folks, we can sort of table some other issues. And these are the things that I have to deliver on. And he knows that he's going to have to deliver on them quickly, right? You don't want to John Lindsay yourself where you sort of come in and you're behind the 8 ball. Like lots of people keep comparing him to LaGuardia and sort of, the economic times. I was like, well, LaGuardia also he was dealing with FDR, who by and large was a relatively rational actor. That's not the luxury that Mamdani has. I think he has a lot more of like a John Lindsay scenario where it's like you were coming into a city where it could actually just implode very quickly if you don't get your sea legs. And you're going to have issues on the left and the right to do so. So I think if the campaigning, I know campaigning is not governance, but if his campaigning style has shown us anything, it's that he knows how to pinpoint sort of opinion leaders. He knows how to sort of work with different organizations to actually help him articulate a message. And I think that's the biggest frustration a lot of people have with Democrats. It's like, you might have good ideas, but you can't articulate them. You don't explain to people what you're doing or why you're doing it. And he's a great communicator. And I do think that what he has on his side is that what he's doing, hopefully he'll be able to explain to New Yorkers, especially New Yorkers who feel like he might be flipping on an issue that they voted for, not thinking that he would turn and do something differently.
Nicole, what do you think? Because also we all met him back in late January. He sat down with us for breakfast. We spoke to him. And the impression that I got after talking to him was that he was a real candidate, that he was extremely charming. He was extremely well-spoken. And even though some of his ideas weren't as maybe for us thinking about, listen, this is not going to work, they weren't that great at that moment. They resonated, and he even acknowledged back then that he didn't have all the answers. So what are we looking at when we see Zohran Mamdani right now?
Yes, and another thing I remember from that meeting was that he was disciplined. So we had a lot of people come in and different personalities and different approaches, but some people came late, and even though we set an hour for people, some people are happy to hang around for another 20 minutes and talk longer and kind of gossip a little bit off the record and so forth. But, Mamdani, even in a relatively low polling time where you would think he would have extra time for us, it was very, friendly, but okay, here our hour is up and we're done and goodbye. It showed a certain discipline that you usually get from more experienced politicians that aren't really, they're not really trying to impress us or whatever, which is striking that the campaign was disciplined from the very beginning. And I think that's also partly why he's winning. I mean, maybe an obvious point, but he's just run the best campaign. I mean, they've actually had a pretty professional operation that has understood how to navigate this landscape. But also, I think he's done so well because there was just a lack of other credible challengers. The general election, there's just not much of a chance for voters to be able to show we prefer a moderate to a progressive because there's not a strong moderate candidate here. I mean, the Cuomo is in the position really of running as an incumbent when people are upset at incumbents. If you're kind of unhappy with how New York is going, you're upset about things, you'll blame Cuomo just as much as you'd blame anybody. I mean, Cuomo was in charge for 10 and a half years at the state level. He hasn't been gone very long. I don't think people ended up very satisfied with the way his last couple of years in office went. So he's almost one of the bums that people are in a throw the bums out mood to throw out. So you have a very weak race where Mamdani just has not been credibly challenged on some of these issues. And I think, should he win, we'll know soon enough. Did voters understand that they were voting more for an idea rather than voting for a series of policies? Because it's very free buses. I mean, he says, I'm going to make the buses free, all the buses free. People will notice soon enough, are the buses free or are they not free? I mean, this is something where you either do it or you don't. There's not a lot of gray area there. Same thing with the rent freeze. People will notice come when their leases are up, has the rent been frozen or not? So he's made these very straightforward promises. If he is not able to navigate the political landscape quickly enough to deliver on those promises in the first 6 months, do people give him extra time? Do they sympathize with his arguments that he's fighting against this machine? Or do they start to get frustrated with him and say, you know what, I voted for a big change in my life and I just don't see much of a change in my life?
And Josh, are you surprised with how poorly so far Andrew Cuomo seems to be doing? He was the only Democratic candidate who didn't sit down with us before the Democratic primary in June. He played really safe, and he's really always really careful with interviews and with media appearances. But then, after he decided to run as an independent, after he lost the primary to Mamdani, he kept getting that question of, what are you doing differently? What do you do wrong before the primary? And he kept saying, well, I didn't really know. Basically, I didn't use TikTok enough. Is Andrew Cuomo still missing the point? And not only missing the point, is it that after losing, he didn't do what maybe he should have done, like go down there, talk to voters about what they really care about, instead of saying, oh, they didn't really get my message? Was it about the medium, or was it about the message that voters didn't like?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I wouldn't say that he has failed entirely in this general election yet. We don't know. We'll find out on Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever the results are confirmed. But I think, the negativity, to me, the overarching negativity is really going to be the biggest question, whether voters agree with that or don't agree with that. He has modulated his message in certain ways. I'll give you an example. Like in the primary, his education plan was essentially a request to the teachers union to endorse him. It was very banal. It was very fill in the blank, very kind of milquetoast, paint by numbers, didn't say very much of anything. In the general, he put out a very reform-minded education plan to truly contrast sharply with Mamdani. He put out a Rikers Island jails plan to contrast more sharply with Mamdani. I don't know whether any of those things truly broke through, whether people are absorbing them, but he has tried to make clear that he is a more pragmatic candidate, that he believes in certain kinds of reform, but he's not willing to, in his mind, go off the deep end where Mamdani is going. So we'll see whether people are absorbing that or not. I mean, two other quick things about Mamdani that I learned from that interview that we had with him with the New York editorial board. One is he does have a penchant to be evasive sometimes. And, he gets a lot of credit for being truly charismatic and magnetic, and that's all true. But he also is a politician, and he does sidestep questions, and he won't directly answer them when he thinks they might lead him into uncomfortable territory. That's one. Two, something he deserves a lot of credit for, he reads, he learns, he's changing his mind in real time. We saw this happen with the abundance movement and with his approach to housing. This is potentially a very positive thing for those who don't support him, and for those who do support him, though they might be disappointed over time. He is as we see him, he's morphing in ways that some are apparent and some that may not be apparent to us.
Well, that's on the morphing issue twice, once at Vital City and once, I believe, in one of the debates. He has used the same phrase, I will do everything in my power to make sure that Rikers Island closes on schedule in 2027. And that's very careful language because he's leaving himself room to say, I tried and I couldn't do it.
Well, I think also, though, it's interesting because I'm curious as to how long the grace period will be. You know, like we know that candidates of color and electeds of color are treated differently in the press. We also know that like people do get some sort of grace for actually seeming like they're trying. There are a lot of ways that, as I said before, Kathy Hochul needs him in ways that he needs Kathy Hochul. So I think that will be an interesting, strange bedfellow. We know that the federal government will sort of come down on New York as promised. And I wonder if that will give him some grace from New Yorkers because they'll understand these constraints coming from, you know, the president's whims and flat out Islamophobia. I am curious because we've had conversations about the press corps not always getting it right when it comes to diverse candidates as executives. You know, our lessons learned from an Eric Adams. Will we see sort of folks just, as you said, Nicole, he's learning in real time and people are willing to learn along with him because we actually are seeing someone who's curious and wants to do better for the city. I mean, there's so much potential in New York. I think that's what makes New York this unique and special place. Like we are all choosing, by and large, to be here and pay exorbitant amounts of money and be very uncomfortable in a lot of ways, buttressing up against a diverse group of people. And does he get some sort of extra bonus points? Because yes, Eric Adams sort of let that pendulum swing too far away from de Blasio. I mean, de Blasio for 6 years wanted to be anywhere but New York. Eric Adams was a little too much of a party cat where it's like, okay, I don't need my mayor like at the club with me. Like, I need you to be, you know, at City Hall. But if we see someone who's like trying to think through these issues, and as he said, if my sanitation commissioner is fantastic, they don't need to agree with me on Palestine. They don't need to agree with me on housing or Rikers. I need us to be simpatico when it comes to sanitation. My transportation commissioner, same thing. So is he going to choose folks who are like the best at their job and then do what de Blasio didn't do, which is I hire great people and then don't listen to them. So it's like, no, hire great people. And I do think that we have an opportunity, if I'm being optimistic, for him to actually appoint really smart people. But because youth is actually on his side in some ways, because he knows what he doesn't know in a lot of ways, he'll actually have experienced people from the Adams, de Blasio, and Bloomberg eras who can actually give him some sort of guidance. Now, that I will say, you know, Harry Siegel, our colleague and my co-host at FAQ, we talked about this. You know, sometimes when that's happened, that's when his messaging gets even more muddled, when you have the old guard kind of coming in and sort of muddling some of these new ideas. It's like, well, if we elected you, it's because we wanted fresh ideas. So New Yorkers are trying to hold two things at once. We want these fresh ideas, we want this new energy and this person who's like, let's think about things totally differently and let's shift the focus. But then at the same time, it's like, well, who's at the store? And like, we need some grownups at the table. We need some adults in the room who know how the city is run. And I think that's the tension that we're going to have to.
I mean, it's interesting. It'll obviously be. I'm sorry, Christina. It'll obviously be a mix, right? He's going to pick a mix of pure, if he gets elected, a mix of pure reformers and older hands who really understand the mechanics of governance deeply. But I think so much of what you smartly raised, like how much grace will he get, how much of a honeymoon might he get, will come down to the weekly CompStat reports. And this is why he probably smartly invited Jessica Tisch to stay, whether or not she agrees. If those things start to go sour quickly, you can be sure that a lot of that grace that people wanted to give him will begin to evaporate. I mean, obviously, there are voices that are going to be out there just looking for every opportunity to call him a failure from jump if he wins. You know, the New York Post and anyone else associated with that. That said, you know, I think if the city feels like it is getting genuinely more chaotic, if it feels like disorder is not getting attention, if it feels like genuine violence is rising, then he's in trouble.
And Josh, we were talking about evolution. Are you surprised at how far Curtis Lewa has made it, and how he's also modulated his speech and also his demeanor. He's trying to be more serious, and he participated in those public safety conversations here at Columbia University, organized by Columbia and Vital City, the organization that you're a part of, and hosted by my former New York One colleague, Errol Lewis. We had Curtis Lewa, we had Zora Mamdani. We didn't have Cuomo; he didn't agree to do it. But are you surprised with Curtis Lewa and how he is polling significantly well for the kind of politics he represents?
I'm not really surprised. I mean, Curtis has always known how to play certain roles, and he has played certain roles, whether it's on, Errol's show or whatever. But he's not and so he gets caricatured as the clown, but
Mhm.
he's really not a clown, particularly when he's talking about public safety. He does have a somewhat nuanced understanding of the world that people might scoff at that, but he sees the world from the ground up the way a lot of New Yorkers see it, and that means he has more nuance than people give him credit for. And he also doesn't. He's never been a close, friend or associate of Donald Trump's, and he has a lot of disagreements with Trump. And so it's easy to put him in a box, but he won't let himself be put in that box. I mean, his deep affection for animals is one, case in point. He's his own person.
Nicole?
And this movement, which seems to have gone away, I guess for obvious reasons, because it didn't work. I mean, people have, the ballots are printed up and people have been voting, but this movement up until a week or so ago that Curtis Lewa should drop out of the election, that he's spoiling the election for Cuomo. I mean, I think it's fair to try to persuade Sliwa voters to vote for Cuomo, but the idea that he should drop out and that he's ruining the election for somebody else was always just ridiculous. I mean, he has a major ballot line. He didn't face a primary opponent. If Cuomo had wanted to run as a Republican, he could have run in the Republican primary and did not. He has people below him on the ballot line. He can't just abdicate the top of the line. And I think Sliwa was right when he said, if you need me to drop out to get people to vote for you, you are the problem. Curtis Sliwa is not the problem. So I think that was counterproductive because Sliwa has actually held to the same consistent principles. I mean, going back to the late 1970s, he's been a pretty predictable, principled person on the New York scene for many, many, many decades. So this idea that he did this on the whim to spoil the election for somebody else and he should be the one to bow out of it never made a lot of sense.
And I know Christina has a lot to say about Curtis Lewa.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, but just comments that he's made about blacks, Latinos, Jews over the years, and just like being on stage, a lot of people don't know who he is, because the great thing about New York is that it is regenerative. So people see him as this fun mascot. And I'm like, no, he's actually, he's had some dangerous views when he keeps saying, lock him up. I'm like, well, who's the them? And I think it's pretty clear for me who he is. But I do think that there were times during this campaign when Cuomo started with, this kind of latent Islamophobic language, and Sliwa was sort of the adult that was like, yeah, no, we don't need to do that. And also, I need to drop out to sort of help you out. And I did appreciate his point. He's like, I'm at the top of the ticket. There are several Republicans who are on the ballot. And for me to just drop out is not fair to the party. And I am the nominee. I think, what's frustrating for a lot of Democrats is that Andrew Cuomo, you lost fair and square. It wasn't a squeaker. We didn't have to have a runoff. We didn't have to have a recount. Nobody wanted you. By double digits, they didn't want you. And so because you don't really have any place to go, you decide to run again as an independent, and New York makes that so. But I don't think that it's fair to call on someone to drop out just because you need them to drop out so you can have a closer race. First of all, the Democrats already spoke, and they were pretty clear about it.
New Yorkers, we are electing a new mayor. We are electing also city council, borough presidents, DAs, but also we have some ballot proposals. And one of the most controversial ones, maybe, is number 6, that is about basically scheduling local elections at the same time as presidential elections. I want to know what you think about that, Josh.
I'm for it. I don't feel super strongly, and I sympathize and understand the arguments against it, that the local races will get swallowed up by the national race. That said, so many weird things motivate the way that any given voter will vote. And I think the overarching importance of getting more people involved in the process and having more people just say, this is the person who I want to be my mayor, overwhelms the rest of it. We unfortunately have struggled with very low turnout. It looks like the turnout's not going to be that low this year, but we've struggled with very low turnout for very many years. And what that means is that certain vested interests disproportionately control the election of a mayor. And I think it is very important to have a broad base of the public, as broad a base of the public as possible, bought into whoever is going to lead this city. And that's why, even though it is true that, it might have a tendency to nationalize our election a little bit, I think most of that's probably already happening anyway, that things are nationalized regardless. And somebody said on Twitter, or on X, that, if this had been an even year election, Mamdani never would have happened. I don't buy that. I think that if it had been an even year election, it's quite possible that you would have had the far left turning out, to speak strongly in favor of someone like a Bernie Sanders or whoever it would be. So I think someone like Mamdani can happen no matter when you schedule.
Nicole, what do you think? Should we change the election year for local elections in New York?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with Josh. And again, I don't sit up all night worried about this. I mean, I don't think it matters all that much, but I think there is, on balance, it would be a bad thing because any debates, the people would be watching the presidential debates. They wouldn't be watching the debates among the candidates for mayor. There's only so much information that people can absorb. And if this were happening last year, it would just be Trump, 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 Trump. You wouldn't have a prayer of getting anyone interested in the differences among the mayoral candidates. And I think, if no one's stopping you from coming out to vote. I mean, if you sort of glance at the right website every couple of weeks or so, you should have some idea that there's a mayoral election. And so not having people come out to vote who know nothing about the topic, but are just going to vote the way the presidential ticket is directing them. It may not be such a bad thing that the voters who know absolutely nothing are just sort of self-selecting themselves out of the election.
Christina?
Well, I'm a hell no on number 6. So Harry Siegel, my co-host, and I talk about this a lot. We are in lockstep. One, participation is abysmal and has been, and yes, it's a lot better this year already, but for municipal elections, we still have abysmal turnout. And I think what we've seen though is you give people candidates and issues and they'll actually be more inclined to turn out. So the voting eligible population in a presidential election is barely 60%. And that's, for a presidential. So we still have a larger conversation as Americans as to why is it that people don't turn out for these important races. And we know it's much, much lower in municipal elections. My fear and concern is that, to Nicole's point, everything sort of gets sucked up with the presidential, but we don't believe in civic education in this country for whatever reason. And so there's a fundamental misunderstanding of who does what and what roles are allocated to the varying levels of government. And I do think that in an odd number, I don't like to say off years because people then take off, but in an odd number year, it does give us an opportunity to actually at least have some of these conversations. We wouldn't have conversations like some of these micro level affordability conversations or transportation conversations when we're thinking about, our members of Congress and the president and the mayor and city council. I mean, the city council has, a budget that's over $100 billion. And so we need to actually think a little bit about these people. But I think it's also a conversation about let's have some candidates that inspire people to go to the polls. So I don't think it's a good idea, and this is sort of an anecdote, but, talking to someone about the mayor's race, a friend of mine said, what candidates do you like? I think I like that Ciccarelli guy. It's wait, the guy who's running for governor of New Jersey? It's yeah, no, he's running for mayor of New York. But because depending on where you live, you get Jersey television and New York City television. So even that is confusing for people because they think that Ciccarelli from New Jersey is actually on the ballot in New York. And so I just think for a lot of people, it's information overload. I think it's yes, we have voter fatigue because we're asked to turn out multiple times a year, almost every year in a row, but I'm willing to sort of take that.
Now, before we go, we have a few more minutes, but this podcast, I always ask my guests to give a book recommendation. I don't know if you're reading something that you're really enjoying or you just finished reading something that you would recommend. It could be a novel, it could be a nonfiction. What would you recommend right now? I'm looking for a book. I'm going to go to a bookstore. Christina, I'll start with you. What are you reading?
I'm rereading The Ungovernable City about John Lindsay and his struggle to save New York by Vincent Cannato. I think that there are a lot of potential parallels that Mamdani might experience, not necessarily with labor unions, but with, just kind of political unrest. We saw, a few years ago with, say, student protests with Israel and Palestine. Obviously, Ukraine and Russia are still there. Obviously, the president is growing more and more erratic every day. So I'm curious as to, we alluded to this before, but, choosing newcomers and also established technocrats in one's administration. And I think that Mamdani would be smart and wise to think about John Lindsay and not just LaGuardia and also he needs to think about David Dinkins because he'll be treated as a minority mayor. And so think about sort of those individuals. But I don't feel like we talk about John Lindsay enough, not just because he's very attractive, but I just think that there's some things that he went through that are parallels to this moment.
Josh?
Well, I have a 4-year-old and 11-year-old, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm reading a book right now. But I'll recommend Nicole's book, Movement, about the history of the subways and transit in New York. We're going to see some, if we get a Mayor Mamdani, or if we don't, we're going to see some really, really interesting conversations about how to help the subways and the buses serve people better, some really difficult trade-offs that are not currently necessarily being framed as trade-offs, but they are. And so that's I think something we've all got to keep a very close eye on.
Nicole?
Yeah, I think people should read Jonathan Mahler's Gods of New York, and they should also read his earlier book, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning. The Gods of New York, the four gods, and he made sure to tell us at a book event I went to a couple weeks ago, he doesn't mean gods like good people. He means like Greek-style gods, where these are the people who are in control of the rest of us. So his four gods were Giuliani, Trump, Ed Koch, and Al Sharpton. And these were the people who defined New York City in the 1980s and into the 1990s. And the reason it's relevant today is not just because Trump is president, but because these were people who understood the levers of New York's attention economy. How do you hold the public's attention in a city where there are a million things to pay attention to? And for most people in their day-to-day life, politics is like way down here in terms of their priorities. They're doing a million different things. And so the reason, the way you get people's attention, even just a flicker of attention, was to be one of these outsized, larger than life, unbelievable characters, people like Sharpton and Trump, and to a lesser degree, Koch and Giuliani. That obviously ended up backfiring on Giuliani, but you see a new era where Mamdani understands much better than anyone else did in this race how has the attention economy changed, and how do you get the public's attention in a different era where it is not the tabloid headlines that are defining everything. But it shows you both that things don't really change and that New York has always been an attention economy even before the term was invented, but that they also do change, in that the way in which these people communicated is less relevant. And so if you don't learn the new way, you are not going to end up commanding people's attention and winning the race.
Yeah, it's a great book that I'm also reading. I think it's the most popular
good.
book among New Yorkers who care about politics, elected officials, political journalists. So we're going to wrap up now. I just want to thank the three of you for being with me today. I want to say that if you want to learn more about the New York Editorial Board, you can check the Substack. It's nyeditorialboard.substack.com. You can find all of us on social media. I'm sure we're all going to be writing about the election. We're going to be on TV. My students are going to have a Substack throughout the day covering the election all over the city. And it's going to be cjspolitics.substack.com, cjspolitics.substack.com. I want to thank the three of you, Nicole, Josh, and Christina, for being with me today. And that's it for this special episode of the Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know podcast. Tuesday is the last chance New Yorkers have to vote. So if you can do so, do it. That's it for this episode. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.